Your ministry has set some very ambitious plans in terms of what you want to achieve in a span of 5 years. And two things stood out for me. One being that you plan to have manufacturing contribute 20% of GDP, and that would be twice what it's doing at the moment. And perhaps that would create the 5 million jobs that you're also targeting. But the question is the how. Take us through maybe 3 pointers how you intend to do this.
You know, 70% of international trade is on manufactured goods. And one of the things that we have to do as a country is, if we have to improve our trade balances, we must get into that 70% space. Our major constraints that has continued to pull down our manufacturing sector has been the high cost of doing business in our economies. It takes significantly much longer and higher cost to transport things around from the port of Mombasa to here and vice versa. The cost of electricity is substantially higher than anywhere else you can get in the world. Cost of labor in some cases have been an issue. So we've had a very uncompetitive manufacturing sector for a very long time. What we've done, and the government has now embarked on, is to very, very ruthlessly address the cost of doing business in this country. So we are planning to reduce the cost of electricity by 40% in the next 3 years. We have embarked on the standard gauge railway that will reduce the cost of logistics substantially.
You talk about the need to be competitive, and I want to zero in on one key issue that you've also mentioned, which is electricity. I talk to a lot of manufacturers, and at times the cost is not as much as a problem, more so the issue of reliability. So looking at it from the perspective of what needs to be done, for you when it comes to reliability of power, what are your thoughts on that?
You know, we've got about 1,700 megawatts of power supply since, the last 50 years. What we are planning to do as government is to increase that by additional 5,000 megawatts in the next 4 or 5 years. Now, that does two things. One is it will increase the supply significantly to deal with issues that may have, led to some of the rationing potentially that might have happened, especially when the water levels are low and the rains are not, as much as was expected. So the increased supply will deal with some of those issues. But the other thing that is being done is investment in the transmission system to make sure that businesses are, business concerns are addressed. We're also moving a step further in making sure that we create zones where industrialists can actually function from, where, bigger supply are actually going to be installed to make sure that some of the issues of concern that you've raised are going to be issues of the past.
Now, still on manufacturing, though, one of the sectors that was one of the big winners when the Chinese premier visited Kenya just early this month. But now looking at it from the perspective of the trade imbalance, which you also mentioned, if you look at imports from China, Kenya imports about 182 billion shillings, but we only export 4.2 billion shillings. Now, this is a very huge gap. But looking at it from the perspective of what needs to be done, value addition, which would help, has only been a buzzword for very many years. So what next do we need to do?
It is a fact that the trade imbalance has been in favor of China for very many years. And that is true for many countries that are actually trading with China, because traditionally they have been exporting manufactured products, which have been at a much lower cost than anywhere else. What we are beginning to do, as I mentioned earlier on, is as the cost of production increases in China, we expect countries like Kenya to take advantage in attracting some of those investors and manufacturers to come and set up their plants here. Only 2 weeks ago, I was hosting 50 investors from India, Indonesia, China, US, and Europe in the area of textile, because they are looking for places where they can set up their manufacturing base. If we have such a huge unemployment and yet our labor costs are high, it doesn't make sense. So we've got to be pragmatic in making sure that in order to employ more of our people, the labor cost needs to be controlled in a manner that is not going to drive our country out of business by driving away investors into other countries.
Now let's veer off from the manufacturing to another struggling sector, and this is textiles, and you've also mentioned it. Now, liberalization seems to have actually killed this industry, whereby we have a lot of cheap imports that are coming into the country. Maybe you can give us some indication, what are the steps that you plan to take to revive this very delicate sector?
You know, one factory that's an apparel manufacturer today employs between 1,000 to 2,000 people. We have the market, unlimited market, $300 billion market out in the US and Europe, with no quota, no tariffs. Yet we have capacity to grow a lot of cotton. Yet we have ability to, to set up textile mills. Yet we have one of the best skilled labor force in this country. And it's just a disjointed program. So what I have done in conjunction with my colleague in agriculture is to make sure that we take this sector right from the beginning, from the cotton growing, right up to when the item is in the shelf of a supermarket somewhere in New York. So in between is then our responsibility to look at the bottlenecks, what is required to be dealt with, what needs to be fixed. And we seem to have the game plan that we are in the process of executing. And we're really excited about it, and leather and textile are the two key sectors that we're focusing on this year to make sure that we check them off very nicely, make sure investors understand what incentives we are providing, and we have the natural competitive advantage in actually driving some of these sectors